High in the Himalayas near the frontier with China, India's leader has come to rally the troops. It's mid-2020, and an outbreak of violence with Chinese forces in this remote, disputed border zone of Ladakh has shaken the whole of India and left 20 troops dead. Narendra Modi is under pressure to put on a show of strength and tell the Chinese to back off.
विस्तारवाद का युग समाप्त हो चुका है.
The thing is, China's expansionist ambitions are not over at all. In fact, it wants to take whole bites out of Indian territory. Tensions on the border are nothing new. In 1962, they erupted into the month-long Sino-Indian War. Now, they're very much back.
India-China border dispute is the biggest land dispute in the world right now. The amount of territory that both countries believe belongs to them is more than anywhere else in the world.
Sushant Singh served in the Indian Army for 2 decades. He's now a leading military analyst at a Delhi think tank. He explained what's been happening at the line of actual control in Ladakh, the de facto border where the clashes happened.
The crisis first was visible to us in May 2020 when a large number of Chinese troops had entered various areas in Ladakh. At this moment, nearly 100,000 troops combined from both Indian and Chinese side are believed to be deployed additionally on the line of actual control. And if I were to show you on the map where these friction points were, from north to south, this is the red line depicts the line of actual control in Ladakh, and this is an official CIA map from 1962. And this is the area of Depsang where the Chinese troops have come in and blocked Indian patrols. This is the second flashpoint of Galwan, where 20 Indian soldiers died on June 15, 2020, along with 4 Chinese soldiers after there was a clash without weapons. And then there are two areas here where there's a crisis in Gogra and Hot Spring, where again the Chinese troops have come in and blocked Indian patrols.
Far to the east, India has increased the number of troops it stations here in Arunachal Pradesh state, because here Chinese ambitions go even further. Arunachal Pradesh is at the eastern end of the Himalayas, bordering China, Myanmar, and the tiny state of Bhutan. This is referred to in the language of border disputes as the Eastern Sector. What's special here is that China doesn't just dispute the boundaries, it claims the entire state, what it calls Southern Tibet.
Eastern sector in certain sense is the most significant because it has the town of Tawang. Tawang was originally a Buddhist town, a part of Tibet. It has got a Tibetan monastery there, where one of the former Dalai Lamas were born. So Tawang remains historically, culturally, strategically very significant for China, which is in India's control.
The idea of a border dispute sounds like a dry technicality, the sort of thing that bureaucrats could work out by poring over maps. But think about what we just heard there. The idea that China sees this region as having historical, as cultural, and strategic significance. It sounds like Vladimir Putin's framing of his invasion of Ukraine. This is dangerous.
It definitely remains conceivable that China could undertake a military operation that could occupy Arunachal Pradesh, particularly areas which it believes are sensitive to it for reasons because of its occupation of Tibet and the way it has dealt with the Dalai Lama. It could definitely do that.
So as India boosts its forces in Arunachal Pradesh, it's facing a real possibility of war with its superpower neighbor.
So in our consciousness, China is a threat. We have nearly a 4,000 kilometer boundary with them. They keep disrespecting the boundary agreements that we have with them and are not willing to proceed on settling of any outstanding issues on that front.
A war between India and China would be a war between two nuclear powers, two of the biggest countries in Asia, where Indian army is nearly 1.3 million strong, whereas Chinese army is nearly 2 million strong. So we are talking about a very big section of the world, a very important part of the world, a very large armies, nuclear armed countries fighting each other.
And crucially, China would have a significant advantage in any conflict.
It's a much bigger power. Chinese economy is 6 times India's size. Chinese defense spending is 4 times India's size. China definitely has more diplomatic power, more global power. It competes with the United States, whereas India does not compete. India may want to compete with China, but India is a much smaller power than China.
The pressure from China is not just being felt on India's borders, it's all across the region. Beijing has built a deep relationship with India's other problematic neighbour, Pakistan. It's been pouring investment into infrastructure through its Belt and Road project, including a massive port on the Arabian Sea, part of a wider strategy that leaves India feeling increasingly surrounded.
The Chinese also have had something called a string of pearls theory. So for many decades, they have been putting up bases, naval bases, around India to surround India. The Chinese also have, as the whole world knows, engaged in something that is being called debt trap diplomacy. Recently, the Sri Lankan economy collapsed because China had extended large amounts of money to Sri Lanka, perhaps through means where they influenced the decision-making process there.
Western delegates at the Raisina Dialogue also expressed huge concern over China's ambitions, not just in India's backyard, but across the Indo-Pacific region, including a recent security deal that it signed with the Solomon Islands, a remote archipelago in the southwestern Pacific. Former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott is one of many warning that China could be planning a military base there.
The Solomon Islands are very strategically significant. It's absolutely understandable that from China's purposes, they would want to secure a significant foothold, ultimately perhaps a major military base in the Solomon Islands. Likewise, as far as Australia is concerned, this is really a red line that shouldn't be crossed.
Even faraway Germany is sounding the alarm. Tobias Lindner is a Minister of State in Germany's Foreign Ministry.
We are concerned about that agreement between the Solomon Islands and China, and I can assure you we will watch very carefully about what is China doing in its neighborhood and in the region.
For the US, China's growing reach across the Indo-Pacific is its top strategic challenge.
China wants to become the hegemon in the region. It wants to displace U.S. power and influence in the region and basically dominate the economics, the political power. It would like to assert its authoritarian ideology throughout the region and basically be able to dictate the terms that the region operates under.
That's a view echoed by leading figures in Delhi.
I think their game plan, whether it is for containing India or their aggressive actions in the Indo-Pacific, have a much larger significance for the whole world. They're taking over countries' economies and their political decision-making powers.
As we've heard, the challenge of China is all-encompassing. So what is India doing about it? Independence Day in Delhi, soon after those border clashes in 2020. Narendra Modi gives a rousing address about his response to China's incursion.
देश की संप्रभुता पर जिस किसी ने आंख उठाई, देश की सेना ने, हमारे वीर जवानों ने उसका उसी की भाषा में जवाब दिया.
TikTok became an unlikely victim of the clashes. India banned the wildly popular Chinese-owned app and dozens of others as part of its retaliatory measures. 2 years on, China's foreign minister paid a surprise visit to Delhi in March 2022, an apparent attempt to get relations back to normal. But his Indian counterpart said that couldn't happen without China stepping back from the border.
If you ask me, is our relationship normal today? My answer to you is no, it is not. And it cannot be normal if the situation in the border areas is abnormal. And surely the presence of a large number of troops there in contravention of agreements is abnormality.
But military expert Sushant Singh says India seems hesitant to tackle the issue.
There's been no discussion in Parliament. No questions have been entertained in the parliament, there have been no official briefings, and the domestic media coverage of the China border crisis is absolutely minimal. There's nothing which is seen on the China border crisis in India. So at one level, while we see this major crisis on the border, at another level, we see a desire to underplay the crisis, perhaps because there's a significant weakness that India has vis-a-vis China, and it's a recognition of that weakness, recognizing that weakness that India really does not want to push hard.
Even after the guns have stopped firing, there is absolutely no willingness to talk to Parliament. There's been a couple of unilateral statements read on the floor of each house by the foreign and defence ministers, but no debate, no responses to questions by MPs. It's been quite disgraceful, actually.
For Shashi Tharoor of the opposition Congress, India is sitting back while trade with China booms on a highly unequal basis.
The trade has gone up to almost $100 billion a year, most of which is in China's favor. It's about 80% Chinese exports to India. Now, in these circumstances, you could see that continue because it was in China's interest to continue it, but not when they're actually shooting and killing your people. That, to my mind, is where the line had to be drawn. Everyone has been prepared to give the government the benefit of the doubt because they keep on saying they're talking to the Chinese and the Chinese should push back, but the Chinese haven't moved back. And in these circumstances, are we going to continue to just sit around temporizing, or are we going to examine broader options?
And while Delhi considers its next moves, Beijing's deepening relations with Moscow only increase the pressure to shore up India's position.
China will dictate the terms of the Russia-China relationship moving forward. So India really has very little to gain by trying to placate Russia. I think that's a miscalculation on India's part, because Russia, if things come to blows with the Chinese on the border, there's very little that Russia will be able and willing to do for India.
It's clear that India needs powerful friends to help it deal with China. And with Russia looking so shaky, the West is the obvious option. And yet this relationship is complicated. As we're about to hear, there are significant question marks on both sides. Coming up in part 3.
India is a central pillar to the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. We see the U.S. Supporting India, building defense security ties, putting emphasis on the Quad.
The Quad is not a formal alliance, but it is potentially at least an extremely strong partnership because it does bring together the main Indo-Pacific democracies, India, the United States, Japan and Australia.
You hear a lot about values underpinning these projects, that as democracies, India and the West are a natural fit. The question is, how close are they really?
Alliances in the West have had a mixed track record. The US has had many alliances. Not all of them have fared very well.
Bulldozer is a term trending in India right now as a troubling wave of anti-Muslim violence hits the country. Authorities gave orders for bulldozers to demolish many structures here.
India is coming to resemble Russia and China far more than it resembles Western democracies.